Good evening, very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us for Taste, Learn and Discover with Pont. My name's Rob. I'm sure I've met most of you, but I'm sure you've seen me at Pont Wine Store during your travels here. So tonight we're looking at Italy Kings of the North, which is a reference to the varieties, I guess, not so much the most popular regions of northern Italy, but also the varieties that maybe are less well known. Just a couple of formalities before we get started. You can see I've got the glasses laid out 1 to 4 in order. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm sure you're all set up. If you haven't received or you didn't receive tasting notes, you can click a link which is below the video there that you're looking at. Otherwise, we'd be more than happy to send a copy to you. But feel free to follow along with those. Just, I guess, a little bit of background on Italy. Many of us have been there, of course, and if you've been there, you can get a sense of the differences between different regions, different foods, slightly different dialects in the language. So in Italy today, there's 20 different wine regions, and Italy, by numbers, is still considerably the biggest wine producer in the world. And that kind of makes, I guess, for drinking Italian wine now, in my opinion, some of the most exciting and some of the most affordable in terms of quality price ratio, if you like, in that that competition, that large number of producers, forces wines to be competitively priced and ultimately better quality. So we are lucky in Australia that we've got so many great producers represented, and from across a lot of different regions. So looking at four wines I should say, 2 whites and 2 reds. First wine we'll have a look at is from the Trentino, Alto Adige, in the northeast of the country. Very much an alpine region. Altitude plays an effect. And as far as the white wines go, which are usually dry and aromatic, that sort of transfers into the aromatics and flavours of them. Camontini is, not a unique proposition in terms of Trentino wine, in that there are quite a lot of what they call cooperatives based in the region, whereby there's a grower which farm communally and vinify communally, or sell to a negotiant to bottle their wine. So this wine, even though it's from that, is from is a single vineyard or single variety estate wine. So there's only one wine produced by Camontini, and it's Pinot Grigio. It comes from 3 different vineyards. Let's give it a little bit of a smell. Wines like this, I think, are certainly at an advantage because, a lot of the Pinot Grigio that we see, that we get to drink or taste, is fairly neutral flavoured, dilute even. So it's picked, machine harvested, picked at sort of a certain level of ripeness, and doesn't really have too much interest or complexity, which is what makes wines like this so appealing. If you smell that, I always get this sort of, alpine, slightly sort of spearminty note to the aromas. And that's largely driven by the altitude that we talked about. There's a beautiful sort of land feature in the Trentino called the Dolomites, which are these enormous sort of granite precipices, which actually have played a huge part in the viticulture and ultimately the wines that are produced there. Largely suffers, I guess, due to it being quite sort of out of the way, not near any of the major centres in northern Italy. I love that sort of that note that you get just smelling that. Have a little bit of a taste. The Camontini project was, just before we go through the flavours in that wine, the Camontini project was essentially they managed to land very famous enologist, being Riccardo Cottarella, to oversee viticulture. This is actually the wine. There's actually three. It's quite interesting. There's three different vineyards in the Trentino, which are managed individually, and then the parcels are actually blended at the end. So even though he oversees that, the whole project and all the vineyards, they're actually run independently by a number of different growers. Flavour that wine, and I think this what sets this wine apart from other Grigio, is that it just has lovely sort of mouthfeel, texture. It's obviously nice and dry, but it has good length. I can still leave that in your mouth for a little while. You can see, those sort of, it's almost like a quince-like flavour in that, but delicious. So certainly, a very popular wine with our customers because, it's just a slightly sort of, I think, a bit more complex take on the variety. Delicious wine. Right, so next wine, looking at La Banestell's Montese Soave Classico, which is located in the western part of Veneto. A lot of people associate, dry Italian white wine with Soave, easy approachability, fairly uncomplicated. But in the hands of, great producer, these wines can be ultra complex, very interesting to drink, very layered. Variety we're looking at from in Soave is Garganega, and DOC regulations mean that 70% of the finished wine has to be Garganega. It's quite interesting, just talking about how these wines are made. They use what they call colloquially heroic viticulture. That means, these vineyards are quite remarkable, and I'd encourage you, when you maybe have a little chance, just to look up online, just maybe how these vineyards are farmed. So heroic viticulture means 30-degree gradient, so that is very steep. The vineyards are literally on terraces, little rocky islands, and the area, most of what is farmed under heroic viticulture is 500 metres above sea level. So you're looking at, altitude plays a part as well. A lot of these wines, especially at this level, are obviously hand harvested. So, there's a lot of time, effort put into that. Fantastic wines, and certainly a labour of love. But, viticulture has existed in this part of Italy for, a very long time, as in a lot of other regions. But, quite unique. Soils are very sort of old, broken down volcanic soils and schist. So you're looking at, an area, put simply, that is not very easy to farm. Quite another, a unique thing about these wines is just the trellising they use, which is pretty much, again, if you look up the vineyards online, you'll see that the trellises run literally from the top of the vine right to the bottom. And that's basically, the region that they're in gets extremely warm during the summer, easily up to 40 degrees. So they're trying to, create a canopy to protect Garganega, the fruit. And Garganega is, notoriously sort of fickle and quite delicate sort of variety. So all that is just designed to preserve the acidity and the freshness in the wines. Let's have a little bit of a look at this. This wine, 70 to 90-year-old vines. So we're looking at very old vine material. You smell this wine, and automatically there's this sort of depth and richness, maybe something that you don't always associate with Soave, sort of complexity. Even though we might not have known that this wine's hand-picked and it's from old vines, it certainly makes sense when you taste that wine. Like, that fruit is very concentrated, There's depth to the wine. We talked about that acidity, which is kind of buried in that quite well. The Battistella, literally one of the benchmark producers today for Soave, and I certainly, I think you see it in that wine. Like, it's just gorgeous to drink. In both these wines, I think, marry, like a lot of Italian wine, white or red, are certainly designed for the table. That's when they show their best. So these wines, I think you'd sort of marry individually to different sort of weight of flavors at the table. Grigio from Camontini, maybe, as an aperitif, or, with, as a plate, shared plate. And, Soave, I mean, that wine, it does have good stuffing and very good richness to it. So, seafood, even sort of poultry go really well. Nice bit of chook. So, that was great. I enjoyed that wine. Next wine. So, if we can sort of imagine, and, where we are in Italy, the next wine is from, it's about as far north as we can go. So further north than the Langhi, even though it is the same grape variety. So we're looking at Nebbiolo, I should say, from the Colline Novarese, which is said like right up in sort of the base of the Alps. So you're looking at a good, hour and a half, I think, from the Langhi. Those regions being Barolo and Barbaresco. I tried this wine actually the other night, and it took a while to come around. So it'd be interesting to try it now, given it's been open a little while. But when it did, it was just like, it was amazing and very complex. Nebbiolo, you're never going to get, huge amounts of colour, but the wine's generally, very powerful, very concentrated, layered sort of flavours. Good swirl. So when when I'm tasting wine from, Barolo, Barbaresco, or Langhi, Nebbiolo, usually sits up and just proclaims itself with all this sort of sweet fruit, very sort of, those probably sort of aromatics of rose and tar. And these wines, given the altitude, are much more subtle, and you can certainly, straight away I see, getting this sort of, the effects of the cooler sort of climate. It's not very opulent, it's not very flashy. You can see something there that's kind of buried, this sort of maraschino cherry quality. And it's Nebbiolo when you taste it. Lots of tannin, high-pitched acidity. But, lovely sort of plumpness on the palate. Iopa, a great producer. And, this is kind of like, this would be their Langhi Nebbiolo equivalent, Colline Novarese. So, again, very historic estate, doing great things. Wines are certainly not priced the same way as Barolo or Barbaresco or Langhi Nebbiolo for that matter. So a great sort of segue into sort of, some delicious northern Italian Nebbiolo. Historically, these wines were just as valuable as the wines, their cousins from the south. So, always represent good value. And just there, like, to me, it's sort of coming around a little bit. Like, it's changing a little bit in the glass. You get this slight sort of balsamic note with it as well, but it's delicious. And again, it's going to look much better at the table, like with your ragu or your lovely sort of homemade pasta. Right. So, last but not least, we're in the Veneto, but we're in Valpolicella. And one of the great producers, again, I think, since we've opened, Marion, have garnered a huge following with our customers. So it was a real treat to try the Valpolicella Superiore. A lot of these wines, you're probably familiar with the term of Amarone. So Amarone is sort of the benchmark expression of Valpolicella, in that the wines are, air dried for a long time. and aged for a long time. So this one is sort of the one down from that, if you like. But Marian's wines, right up to the Amarone, I've always thought their beauty is in their freshness and their detail, their elegance, if you like, compared to their peers. Really well situated vineyards, old vineyards as well. The varieties you're looking at here are Corvina and Corvione, mostly, with a few bits of other pieces in there. And this wine, mostly sort of 30% Appassimento, which is partial air drying before they crush. The parcels are actually separated and then blended together at the end. So vinified stainless steel and then aged for quite a long time. You're looking 2.5 years in barrel to mature. A lot of people, when they taste Amarone, they're expecting this wine that is just hugely concentrated, high in alcohol. Not always the case, especially for Superiore. And again, like every time I drink this wine or taste this wine, I'm just amazed by the aromas are just sort of intoxicating. You can see what I mean, well, hopefully, by the freshness. You do get slightly, that sort of slight character of saturation or fruit raisining, a little bit on the mid palate, but the rest of it is just so lively and, fresh, and acidity is so well integrated into that wine. It's, although they make Amarone, Marianne's Valpolicella Superiore is always the wine I love to drink from them. It's just a great bottle of red. Again, very versatile. Like you're looking, if you're in Italy, something like bistecca, something with a little bit more protein in it to just melt that tannin and the acidity away. A little bit of aged Reggiano. Delicious. Right, so that's that. Hopefully, a little bit of an insight into the diversity and different varieties that exist in northern Italy. So much more, obviously, than Barolo and Barbaresco. Thoroughly enjoyed those wines, and I hope you did too. Thanks so much.